am a member of Gen Z, and people seem absolutely baffled by us. Why does Gen Z not want to work? Why does Gen Z complain so much? Why does Gen Z hate skinny jeans? I ask a different question. Why does 63% of Gen Z and millennials not know that 6 million Jewish people were murdered in the Holocaust? Why do 11% believe that Jews caused the Holocaust? And why do 10% not believe or doubt that the Holocaust happened? These statistics are all from a survey conducted by Schoen Cooperman Research, and I find that the answer to all of these questions about Gen Z, besides the one about skinny jeans, have less to do with the individual characteristics of members of my generation, but rather are rooted in larger systemic issues. 93% of my generation and millennials believe that all schools should be required to teach about the Holocaust. So where is the disconnect? When I was a senior in high school, I was asked to co-lead a meeting about the genocide that the Chinese government is committing against Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region. This was as the 2022 Beijing Olympics were going on, and we wanted to come together as a community to discuss what we could do. Dozens of students showed up at lunch that day, some who were already knowledgeable about the subject and passionate about taking action, but most were just eager to learn. We began the meeting with a brief overview of the history of the Uyghurs in China and shared accounts of the destruction of mosques, forced sterilizations, and internment camps where over 2 million Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic minorities have been detained. In fact, the alleged actions of the Chinese government in Xinjiang violate every single provision of the United Nations Genocide Convention, according to an independent report by more than 50 global experts in international law. As I tried to open the meeting up for discussion, I was interrupted. Another one of my co-leaders interjected, saying that this genocide was propaganda created by the US government with political motivations. That no one could really be sure what was happening, and even if we were sure, it wouldn't be enough to constitute genocide. I was absolutely shocked. This was my first face-to-face encounter with genocide denial. I quickly retorted with statistics, quotes from first-hand accounts, and even satellite images of the detention camps. But none of it mattered. They continued with their denial, and we continued sharing what we knew to be the truth. What was supposed to be an informative, productive meeting had devolved into an ugly fight, a back-and-forth argument about facts which were supposed to be a springboard for discussion, but instead became an entry point for those individuals to spread misinformation and conspiracy theories. But what upset me the most was not those particular individuals. It was the dozens of other students who had showed up wanting to become more informed, but instead were met with a confusing array of opposing claims being hurled at them. Unfortunately, this is representative of the way that a lot of young people learn about genocide. Only 21 states mandate Holocaust education, and even fewer mandate comprehensive genocide education. And these mandates do not cover independent or religious schools and do not necessarily mean that teachers are trained to instruct on these topics. So where else do young people turn to learn about past and current events? The internet, where disinformation runs rampant. According to a Pew Research study, of people ages 18 to 29, 63% reported regularly getting their news from Snapchat, 44% from Instagram, and 52% from TikTok, which is regulated by the Chinese government and has been known to censor all videos sharing information about the Uyghur genocide. For me, this provides a sharp contrast to how I first learned about genocide. Growing up Jewish, I cannot remember a time when I didn't know about the Holocaust. It was part of our history. My family talked about it and took me to Holocaust museums, and I learned about it in religious school. It was always discussed in an age-appropriate manner. I gradually learned more as I got older and was always encouraged to ask questions. But the first time I deeply engaged with issues surrounding genocide was when I was 12 years old and I first met a Holocaust survivor. By the time she was 12, Dorothy Greenstein had already lost 5 members of her immediate family. 2 of her sisters perished in the Warsaw Ghetto, and her parents and brother were murdered in Treblinka death camp. Dorothy was the youngest child in a large family. She was bright and inquisitive, with a curiosity about the world, a knack for languages, and a dream of one day becoming a pianist. She was just 8 years old when the Nazis invaded her home country of Poland. The rights and freedoms of Jews were gradually stripped away before her family and the other Jews in their community were forced to move into the Warsaw Ghetto. As Dorothy described it, the food was scarce, the water was scarce, the medicine was scarce. We had doctors, but what good are doctors when there is no medicine? Children were dying in the streets. Parents were sitting and crying. Dorothy helped keep herself and her family alive for more than 2 years by sneaking out of the ghetto to buy food, potatoes, bread, sauerkraut, whatever she could find. When rumors began that the ghetto was going to be liquidated, her father gathered her and her siblings and told them to flee to try and save themselves. She moved from place to place, leaving whenever she sensed danger, and later was able to attain a false Polish Catholic birth certificate, allowing her to live out the rest of the war working as a mother's helper. Using her perfect, unaccented Polish, the wisdom of someone far beyond her years, and what she believed to be the help of angels, she, still a child, had miraculously survived one of the worst atrocities in human history. I was in absolute awe of Dorothy that first day I heard her speak as she stood at the podium wearing a bright multicolored dress and a feather boa. I thought to myself, this is the coolest person I have ever seen. I sheepishly went up to her after her speech to thank her, and we quickly realized we were practically neighbors. Almost every week, from the time I met her until she died, I would visit her, and she would teach me Hebrew and tell me stories. But whenever she told a story, it wasn't just a detailed recollection of a series of events. It was a carefully compiled teaching, in which I had an open view of her brilliant childhood thought processes, her vast knowledge of almost every subject under the sun, her sense of humor, and of course, her deep ability to connect with people. She became my teacher, my mentor, and my family. I had the honor of hearing her speak many times, and every single time I would witness transformation in the audience. The looks on their faces, the questions they asked, the gushing words of appreciation that even the sulkiest 14-year-olds would have for her, and the thousands of handwritten letters she saved, all from students telling her how hearing her story and learning about the Holocaust had impacted their lives, how she inspired self-reflection, mindset shifts, and profound action. She inspired my shy 12-year-old self to begin to use my voice in ways I had never imagined and led me to a passion for storytelling and public advocacy. A survey by the USC Shoah Foundation, Yad Vashem, and the Anti-Defamation League found that students exposed to Holocaust education had more pluralistic attitudes and were more open to people of differing viewpoints. They also demonstrated greater willingness to challenge incorrect or biased information, challenge intolerant behavior in others, and stand up to negative stereotyping. Students who were exposed to survivor testimony specifically demonstrated higher critical thinking skills and a greater sense of social responsibility and civic efficacy. For decades, Holocaust survivors have been creating art, writing books, and traveling the world to speak, all to tell their stories, sharing their deepest traumas and the horrors that were inflicted upon them, in order to give us an understanding of what happened, to make sure that we know the exact, unequivocal truth, so that we can build a better world. And that better world is so desperately needed. People are struggling to pay rent and put food on the table. There is a war raging in Ukraine, and our planet is literally burning. There are hundreds of deeply important, urgent, and pressing issues facing our society today. So why now? With all of the other social justice causes that deserve our attention and our action, why should we devote our time to making sure that young people learn about genocide? Well, economic populism was part of the main platform that the Nazi Party used to raise to power, but they weren't taken seriously until Germany faced crippling inflation during the Great Depression. We cannot have the context to understand Russia's invasion of Ukraine without understanding how the Soviet Union and Germany invaded Poland in 1939, or how the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia 3 decades later. Inequities and conflicts over resources, problems that will only get worse due to the impending climate catastrophe, have the ability to destabilize regions, creating the necessary conditions for extremists to rise to power. And we can learn from the refugee crises that have arisen in the wake of past genocides for how to avoid the same mistake with the inevitable millions of climate refugees who will need safe places to seek asylum. In learning about each genocide from the past, there are lessons and warnings to heed. As a young person, it is easy to become overwhelmed by the cycles of hatred, destruction, and violence our society constantly seems to find itself in. I often hear the question thrown out, pertaining to a myriad of issues, will we ever learn? No, not if we do not teach. We are facing hate, Holocaust denial, and white supremacy, along with its associated incidents and crimes, while simultaneously, we are not preparing young people to understand and respond to the situation. When we fail to teach about genocide and human rights, we are conditioning young people to be bystanders to hate at best and active participants in it at worst. The key to teaching these topics does not simply lie in the knowledge we have about genocide, but in how that knowledge is disseminated. We have the knowledge and can continue to expand upon it by gathering firsthand testimonies, compiling information in databases and books, supporting archives and museums dedicated to housing this history, and creating new ones where there are none. But how do we get this information from the books and databases and archives and museums into the consciousness of young people? That is where you come in. Schools are one of the most powerful tools that we have in order to reach and inform young people, and oftentimes they are being taught history that is directly adjacent to various historical genocides, creating the perfect opportunity to include a fuller, more accurate picture of history. We need to fight for mandates of Holocaust and genocide education in every state in the United States and create statewide commissions with experts to make sure that these issues are being taught in an accurate and meaningful way. And in order to do this, we need to dismantle the stigma surrounding teaching difficult topics at an early age. Because when teaching history, our curriculum should reflect a narrative that is truthful, not one that is easy. Genocide education should begin in elementary school and build each year as children grow emotionally and intellectually. Kids can handle it. It is far more upsetting and confusing for a child to grow up hearing a completely whitewashed version of history, only to find out that the truth was so starkly different than what they were led to believe. And we need to do a better job of meeting young people where they already are, on the internet. I want to share a metaphor taught to me by my friend David Lenka, who is a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor. A knife is a powerful weapon. In the hands of a killer, it has the power to take a life. In the hands of a surgeon, the power to save one. So too is the internet. When used for good, we have the power to engage millions of young people in genocide education and prevention efforts. But the internet cannot be a reliable place to learn and teach about genocide while it remains a breeding ground for denial and disinformation, and while social media companies choose to protect hate speech over protecting the safety of citizens. Social media companies have shown that they are willing to regulate disinformation on topics such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2020 election, and the war in Ukraine, either through disclaimers connecting users with accurate resources, by flagging misleading claims, or removing posts entirely. We need to put the same kind of public pressure on these companies to remove genocide denial and disinformation from their sites. And finally, in Judaism, there is a term lador vador, which means the passage of values, traditions, and history from generation to generation. In this critical moment, we need all hands on deck from every generation. We learn from each other and make a larger impact since our types of knowledge, networks, and spheres of influence are different. Harnessing that collective power will allow us to build an unprecedented intergenerational coalition to fight for a world of empathy, solidarity, and justice. Gen Z inherits a world on a precipice, a world in crisis. We will be the last generation with the opportunity to know Holocaust survivors face to face. We can also choose to be the last generation that knows a world which shows indifference in the face of hatred. Thank you.